For those of you who don't know, not too long ago, I sold my soul for a £200 used dishwasher. This has proved to be a rather irresponsible decision, as I am now a soulless husk who sees the dead. Oh, and the dishwasher has started leaking a weird brown gunk all over my kitchen floor, which kinda sucks. I recently made the decision to reclaim my soul, which has turned out to be kind of tricky. So far, my endeavours have led me to summoning a demon in my apartment who attempted to drag me back to hell and violate me. But don't worry, my naked ghost roommate Gary vanquished him, I think. He has a permanent ghost boner. It's super weird. Anyway, it turns out that the only way to reclaim my soul is to have it given back to me by the guy who I traded it with. Simple stuff, surely. Not quite. I had been unable to contact him online, because the douche is ignoring all of my messages. That pretty much exhausted all of my options, so I decided it better to just embrace a soulless lifestyle. Sure, it had its flaws. I now couldn't leave my apartment without witnessing a parade of deceased souls, and the floorboards inside my apartment, where there had briefly been a portal to hell, now leaked the tears and howls of the damned. But I guess nothing's perfect. I could grow accustomed to the dead, and I'd already covered my floor with a nice new rug that muffled most of the cries of the condemned. Things were looking up. That is, until I made a solid breakthrough in the search for my soul through my exceptional perception, cunning, and intuition. The newspaper's ad read, "Need new stove? Perhaps fridge and freezer? Call now. We'll accept best offer. Now accepting souls." It seemed a bit too on the nose to be a coincidence. I made the call, got an address, and embarked on my journey of soul reclamation. Gary joined me, and I sensed that this was just another average Tuesday for him. Our journey took us to a downtown marketplace. It was early morning, and the place was filled with people setting up stalls of strange meats and fish, novelty decorations, and knockoff clothes. The dead were everywhere. Gary approached one, a weeping woman who stood in the middle of the walkway. She was dripping wet from head to toe, her skin a strange tint of blue, and her arms slashed from wrist to elbow. He stood in front of her, presenting himself. She stopped weeping, looked Gary up and down, and then proceeded to continue weeping whilst walking away. Gary looked like he let out an inaudible sigh. I guess even in death, rejection is hard. Undeterred, he walked over to another. I decided to leave him to it. You do you, Gary. The actual living souls were busy unloading vans and pitching signs, and I wondered where it was that I would begin my search. The call hadn't been very specific on the exact location of this trader of souls, so I guessed I'd have to do a bit of legwork. Maybe give a few people the rundown. Maybe play a little good cop bad cop with my spectral sidekick. One thing was certain. It would be a grueling day. "Oh, you want Dave? He's right in there." The fish salesman pointed towards a warehouse at the other side of the market, handing me back the newspaper clipping that I'd given him. Alright then. The warehouse in question looked deserted, and the only entrance I could find lay down a dingy alleyway, locked with thick rusted chains. The whole place screamed murder. As I approached the alleyway, a hand grasped my wrist and pulled me back. "You don't want to go in there," an old veiled woman informed me in a thick Eastern accent. "No good in there, child. Only darkness." Her skin had the feel of dry plastic and was as smooth as sandpaper. "Right. I'm actually looking for a guy who has my soul. I hear his name is Dave." She let go of my arm and began taking steps backwards, looking me up and down as she did so. You are unnatural. Tainted. No. Evil. Unclean. You leave. Be gone." She began gesturing me away with one hand, another reaching for a talisman around her neck and grasping it tightly. She began hissing, and I got the impression that I wasn't wanted, so I continued down the alley. Getting inside proved rather difficult. The door was locked. and as rusted as they were, the chains wouldn't budge. There was a small window overhead, which after a great deal of exertion and strain, I managed to climb and squeeze through, landing hard on the other side. Gary rejoined me and just walked right through it. Ahead of me lay a barely lit stretching hallway. Graffiti stained the walls, covered in obscenities and foul depictions of genitals. Smeared next to the doorway, in what I assumed was red paint, were the words, "Abandon all hope, dickweeds." A cold wind ran the length of the hall, and the darkness felt heavy. I looked at Gary, who was busy comparing a detailed depiction of the male member with his own phantom limb. Looking defeated, he walked ahead. A lifetime must have passed while we walked that hall. It felt like hours rolled over into days, but at the same time, it felt like no time had passed at all. The way in which we'd entered had long since disappeared into nothingness, and yet we reached no end. The hallway was ceaseless. My eyes adjusted to the darkness as best they could, but I stumbled occasionally, and fell flat on my face more than once. Gary attempted to catch me at one point, but I fell right through him. I appreciated the thought though. After a long while, or maybe just a few minutes, I suggested we should probably turn back, and that no good would come in from walking down that hallway forever. Gary looked as though he was cool either way, so I took the initiative and began to turn back. "There's no escape," a voice whispered from the darkness. Everywhere and nowhere. It was soft, almost childlike. "You cannot escape eternity." Another voice joined it. It too, a whisper, but distinctly deeper and croaked. "You will wander this place, until the stars bleed out and all light fades from the heavens." A third voice, this one louder and almost taunting, a slight laugh in the tone. "Your feet will grind to blood and dust, and even then you will crawl on mangled stubs and still come no closer to salvation." More voices pitched in, as though every speck of darkness was reaching out and singing similar horrors into my mind. A chorus of the macabre and morbid. "I'm actually just looking for Dave. Do you guys know if he's here?" Or the voices burst into manic giggling and laughter inside my head, louder than anything I thought possible. My head throbbed with the weight of it all. A few trickles of blood began dripping down from my nose. I could taste iron in the back of my throat. In synchronicity they spoke, and each word was an explosion inside my skull. "Lost little lamb. Cry so we can taste the tears. Scream so that we may find bliss in the melody. Suffer so that we may make you pure. Embrace us." From all around my being, hand outstretched, they gripped clothing and skin and hair, dug into bone and hooked into tendons, pulling and pushing and yanking and spilling, and tearing and laughing and screaming and ripping, and lights turned on overhead, and I found myself writhing on the floor, alone. There were no hands, no voices in my head. We were in a large warehouse floor, surrounded by boxes and crates and trucks. Gary stood beside me, still naked as ever. In the centre of the floor sat a young guy on a fold-out garden chair. He looked no older than 18, and wore dirty overalls and a black beanie. He waved. Hey." I pulled myself to my feet, dusting myself off. "That was weird." "Yeah, sorry about that. Security system. Cool, right? Had a few too many break-ins recently," he announced, sipping at a thermos. He gestured for me to approach. "Are you Dave?" I asked, rubbing at my back which ached fiercely. "Yep, that's me. You here for the stove? I got a couple left. Good condition too. Almost new." The next few minutes were spent with me explaining that I wasn't in fact there to purchase a stove, and was in fact trying to get my soul back. I explained that I traded my soul online. He apologised for not responding to my emails, and got me a coffee. It tasted like manual labour. He was an alright guy really. He was even willing to trade back my soul for the dishwasher, so long as I paid him small accounting fee. We settled on £50, which I wasn't too pleased with, but figured it was probably the best deal I was going to get. We shook hands, and he went and fetched a water-damaged box filled with junk and began rustling through it. I know I had it here somewhere. No, not that. Nope, that's Jimmy's. Where did I... Oh shit, that's right. He closed the box and scratched at his jaw. What's wrong? I asked as he started to pace back and forth. Yeah, bit of an issue, buddy. I traded a whole bunch of souls yesterday, and I think one of them was yours. Feeling slightly displeased at this revelation, I inquired to whom he'd given my soul. It's... right. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty certain that your soul is now in hell. Yeah, like 98% sure. He went on to explain that he had a regular trade deal with some demon. Dave gave him souls, and the demon gifted Dave with rare antiquities and ungodly security systems. It was apparently a no-go-back kind of trade, and that getting it back was pretty much a lost cause. I was beginning to think that I'd wasted an entire Tuesday. Dave, however, advised me that all was not lost. He could simply open a gateway, and we could go and get the soul. This, of course, came with an opening a door to hell fee, but Dave assured me that he did in fact accept credit cards. After the payment cleared, Dave went about drawing all sorts of chalk symbols on the wall to the warehouse floor, each appearing to be from a different language that I imagine nobody has spoken for a very long time. When that was finished, he smeared an odd scarlet liquid across the symbols that he'd got from a jar, and coupled this with a brief reading of scripture. Gary wandered around, and I did a Sudoku. Right, that's it. Now we wait, Dave announced with his hands on his hips. He looked quite pleased with himself, then frowned for a moment and licked his thumb, rubbed a little bit of chalk from the wall, and then returned to looking pleased. It should open any minute now. We waited for 7 hours. Dave filled me in on the whole soul trade business, about how he'd gotten into it from his grandma, and was trying to bring the industry into the 21st century. He'd only been doing it for a couple of months, but things were on the up and up. He was even thinking about setting up his own website. So, does your friend wear clothes, or is that a stylistic choice? Oh, yeah, that's Gary, I muttered, taken aback. You can see him? Clear as day. Sup? He nodded, and Gary nodded back. I got the sight, as my grandma used to say. Spooky stuff. Right, well, I'm not sure A low groan emerged from the wall, like the bricks themselves were in pain. I put down the coffee I'd been nursing, and Dave jumped to his feet, elated. Yes! Finally! Small fissures began to appear in the brick, cracking like outstretched veins. From them, a thin fog began to seep outwards. The lights overhead flickered, and instantaneously erupted into a shower of sparks and glass. You've done this before, right? I asked. The fog sank from the cracks and began flowing across the ground. Chips of brick began to crumble, and the groan grew even louder. Oh yeah, tons of times. Dave had to shout at this point just to be heard over the ceaseless din of the opening gateway. Well, maybe not to success. The world as I knew it exploded. The wall erupted outwards, sending chunks of brick and concrete flying. Dave flew with it, dust and rubble, and blood spraying from where he had been standing. Where there had once been a wall, a gaping hole into nothingness now stood, a swirling vortex of foreboding darkness. The air all around began to move towards it, like water down a plug hole. The ground beneath my feet was gone before I knew what was happening, and I found myself falling through the air towards the vortex gaping more. I was pulled ever inward, swirling and screaming and howling into the madness of it all. And then, I wasn't. I was on the floor, in the warehouse where I'd been only moments ago. For the second time, I stood and brushed myself off, and coughed up what 9 out of 10 doctors would call a concerning amount of blood. Disoriented, I reached for my coffee and took a sip, which I immediately spat across the ground. It tasted like shit. Like actual feces. I threw the cup on the ground and looked around. Yeah, I was still in the warehouse, but everything seemed slightly off. The walls that had once been slightly dirty were now layered in a thick coat of rust. The air was heavy and dense. The ground was coated in the fog that had seeped through the walls earlier. The gateway was gone, and the wall that stood where it had been was coated in all manner of filth. I could see my breath escape my lips, and my whole body shivered in the cold. Shadows darted around my peripheral vision, and the groan that I had heard earlier was now a steady hum in the distance, ever so faintly in the distance. I could hear screaming. Gary stood beside me still. I swallowed hard. The only comfort I could find in the moment was that Gary looked as disinterested as ever. He began to walk forward, and I followed. I descended into hell, guided by my own fully erect Virgil.